Folks, well, we are going to have to do it. We are going to have to revisit a topic that the three amigos discussed about a year ago when we were pontificating what might happen in 2023. All three of us agreed, given that the giveaway administration, which we have affectionately called them, we're going to try to figure out what's going on in the housing market. And all three of us said national rent control will at least be discussed. Matt, I believe you were the first to bring this up, so we will start with you. I don't know if you've seen the news in the last 48 hours, given you have no power, but they're talking about it. National rent control. You were right.
Yeah. Boo me. I mean,
Boo me.
yeah, it's not. I mean, what I basically do to come up with what they're going to come up with next is I think of the absolute dumbest, most counterproductive thing that anybody could ever do. And then that's my top three list for what they're going to start working on. And there you go. That's how I got there. And
Yeah.
so in my state, they're actually doing it's on the docket again in my state, and it's going to be interesting to see. And then the other thing that they're trying to do as well as part of national rent control is they're also trying to make Section 8 slash housing a protected class, which
Oh,
means you have to rent to them, that you no longer have that choice.
right.
And so it will come to a point where I think that there will be division in states. But yeah, national rent control will be a conversation. I think, thankfully, with the makeup of Washington right now, I don't think it passes.
Right.
But I think statewide, there are going to be some states that relent. There are going to be some states that crumble, and you know, California's done it. But I never thought I'd say this, but California apparently is the most sensible of the rent control states. Like it's 5 and 5. It's five
Yeah.
with a cap of 10, right?
Right. Five with the cap of
And
10. Yeah.
and St. Paul, Minnesota passed 3%.
Yeah.
There were
Yeah.
projects that are literally stopped that had
Yep.
been greenlit, and they stopped. Developers were like, "We will never, ever, ever continue that project until that's abolished."
Yeah. 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 Rent control is a form of price caps.
Absolutely.
Something you learn in economics very early on is that price caps don't work. It actually drives out innovation, efficiencies. You are left with the least quality, the least good operators. The people you are trying to help get destroyed or hurt within a very short window. But Dion, when I say national rent control, again, it's something we discussed about a year ago. What hits you first?
Well, I remember us talking about it. We were going through, there's so many crash videos. Something could happen that would cause a crash. What would it be?
Yep.
And I don't know that nationwide rent control would cause a crash. I think it would hurt the renters and the people who watch your content one rental at a time constantly kind of understand what we're talking about. The person who just found this video understands that there's three people who own properties, who, of course, the layman is going to say, well, you guys don't want rent control because it hurts your business. And actually, it doesn't really hurt the landlord.
No.
It forces the landlord to do rent increases every year. I know
Yes.
several investors who haven't done a rent increase. Graham Stephan, other people who've just never done a rent increase in decades, because if the rent control doesn't apply to you, like you have single family or you're house hacking a small multifamily in certain states, even though where there's rent control, it doesn't apply to you. You just kind of set the rents where you need to. But if you know that you own a property where if you ever wanted to sell, the rents have to be at a point where it makes sense for lending to happen, not just to find a buyer, but for a lender to say, yep, the NOI on that is good enough.
Exactly.
Rent control kills that. So in our state, I'm in Washington, there's a revised code of Washington that says rent control is illegal. And of course, every couple of years, it comes up as a point of discussion for politicians too. Seattle came out with a version where they said, okay, it's not rent control, but if you do a more than 10% increase, you have to give 6 months notice. If the tenant doesn't like the increase, then you have to pay them 3 months rent to relocate them. It's a version of rent control.
Yeah. You think?
Seattle lost 3,000 rentals.
Exactly.
So 3,000 units
Exactly.
vanished. Some became, I'm going to sell it to an owner occupied. So great, it helped housing. Most became short or midterm rentals. So you don't have the rent control impact. And
Exactly.
you're right, Matt, talking about St. Paul, which to me, it's like St. Paul, Pennsylvania, Pluto, those places I think are real, but I'm never going to go there. They came out with the 3% rent cap. And normally when you have rent control, age of building is a factor.
Yeah.
To say we have rent control, but for the first 5 years it doesn't happen. So builders are encouraged to still be able to make a profit. They applied it to new builds.
And they
And
stopped.
people said,
Yeah.
we're planning on something in 6 months. That's canceled. We're in the middle of a build right now. We're stopping it. It'd be better just to leave a vacant property that we don't spend any more money on than be trapped by this regulation. So I don't know that we have enough people in office who can, and it's their base, the people that vote for them, where they can go, okay, and this is going to sound bad, but are my constituents smart enough to understand that nationwide rent control would be a bad thing? Or do I try to push this so that the people who think rent control benefits them, are going to continue to vote for them? So I think it's going to be something we talk about. I agree with both of you. One of the benefits of having a split government is not a lot of big crazy things happen.
Yeah.
But the last couple of years have really impacted rents and put it kind of the forefront of topics. And I could see it, something like it happening, which honestly, and so as a human, I don't want to see it because it's going to hurt tenants. As an investor, as a very selfish person, I'd love it. I would like, okay, great. Yep. So here's the forced increase every year to make up, to make my retirement better, which sounds horrible to say out loud. I would rather have millions of people not be damaged than just, the owners benefit from a program like that.
Yeah. So again, it's really interesting. There's actually historical precedent and stuff that you can look up with that happened decades ago. So it's still recent. It should still be in the memory, where local governments have tried rent control. And again, price caps are all the same. It feels good in the moment. What's a moment? A year. With rent, it's a year, it's 2 years. Because again, it even in a normal time, it only goes up, once a year. But very, very quickly, tenants will start to feel the pain. And I think it's exactly what you discussed, Dion. I think step one, a portion of landlords, and I don't know, we can have an argument about, or a discussion about what percentage. Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20% of landlords kick out the tenants and sell the property? That may not sound like a lot, but when you realize we're already millions of units short for supply, that's a problem. And I would argue a big problem. Second, Dion, I think you brought this up. And again, I can talk about my experience in California because the king of California adopted rent control. I think it was 3, maybe 4 years ago now. And I've owned rentals in California for about 22 years. So for about 16 or 17 years of that, I would not raise rents every year. If you were a good standing tenant, you paid your rent on time, you could always go at least a year between rent increases. And when the rent increase happened, I would never take you to market. It was kind of the binder strategy before I knew what the binder strategy was, right? I wasn't trying to grind tenants higher. Now, ever since Gavin Newsom has instituted rent control, I am forced to raise rents every year and have. And we go to the max, whatever the max is, right? It's 5 plus inflation with a cap of 10. So again, Olivia and I have done really well because of rent control. We don't want to do it, but again, the problem here is once you get behind, you can't make it up. So my normal strategy of waiting a year or sometimes 2, I can't do that anymore. King Newsom says I can't do that, so I won't. If the king says, I won't. So at the end of the day, price caps don't work. It will be a disaster. It will feel good for one election cycle, and then it will be a train wreck. And then the last thing we shouldn't forget is I don't even think I think it's unconstitutional. But we had an eviction moratorium, which was unconstitutional. We had student debt, which was unconstitutional. And I think there's a third one that I'm forgetting. So who knows? It could happen. Matt, what do you think?
Yes. Yeah. All those things, it can happen. It's something to watch for. It's, when I had the opportunity to invest in 3 different markets, I picked the one that was the most fiscally conservative, the one that had the fewest programs, the one that most aligned with business practices. And those other states are really struggling. Maine is, I believe, if they're not the highest people on assistance per capita in the country, They're in the top 3.
Wow.
And that really makes for difficult housing there. So it's just a way that people that are largely lifelong bureaucrats that have no understanding how businesses operate and how markets actually operate, that think this is a good idea. And this is what happens when people that don't understand simple math and economics are put in charge of math things that require math and economics.
Yeah. Matt, where can people find you?
Lumberjack Landlord on YouTube and on Instagram, and hopefully with power later this evening.
There you go. Dion, what are your closing thoughts and where can people find you?
So 2 things, one and then a list. The first one, you said that there's probably some recent examples of how this could be a problem. And I'll remind you of what I call, it's called the wizard's first rule. People are stupid, from this guy, Terry Brooks, an author. Remember, 61% of people in that Yahoo article said that current interest rates are unprecedented, meaning they've never happened before. Okay, so people have short memories. So I think that the majority of people, being stupid, are going to think this is a good thing. But here's the 6 quick things that can happen if rent control is considered in an area. The first is there's going to be less units because people are going to stop investing there, stop building, stop doing flips and burrs, right? So there's just less inventory. You'll lose rental units because people will turn long-term rentals into short-term units. So we lose that. There will be the ones you talked about, Mike, where people are like, okay, I just can't turn this into a profit. I'm going to kick the tenant out and I'm going to sell the property. There will be the investors who are saying, okay, I'm going to stick it out in my area, but in order to be marketable, I have to jack the rent up really high just before the rent control comes into effect.
Yep.
Or I'm going to kick the tenant out, rehab the unit. So I have to give 60-day notice or 90-day notice, whatever your area is, and say, I'm going to do a rehab. So you have to leave because now they know rent control is going everywhere. Again, massive rent increase. The other one is they're going to say, and this might be a smaller amount, they're going to say, look, I can't run this as a profitable rental. I'm going to kick the person out and I'm going to move in. It's not just going to be my primary. It can't be a rental because the area where it is. There will be some owners, very few probably who choose, but there will be some who are forced to leave places vacant.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you can't charge a rent that would give you the money to make profit, to fix and repair and maintain things, you're not going to keep that. And if there's no buyers, if you're underwater, you're just going to let it go back to the bank. So there's this cascading effect that would happen on a nationwide scale that hopefully some other people think through.
Yeah, well, hopium. So Dion, where can people find you?
Right here on YouTube, Dion Talk Financial Freedom.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.